Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we are stripping away the comforting myths of eternity to face the ultimate question. What happens if there is no God and no afterlife? Over the next few minutes, we'll explore the science of what actually happens when consciousness fades, why the concept of a soul clashes with modern brain chemistry, and the profound realization that accepting our own absolute end might be the only true way to find meaning in life.
Yeah, it's definitely a heavy topic we've got today.
Oh, for sure. And, before we jump into the deep end here,
Hmm.
if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button, because this particular deep dive is going to challenge some pretty deeply ingrained assumptions we all have about existence and, well, what it actually means to be alive.
Right, and our mission for this deep dive is really to look objectively at the arguments our sources lay out regarding death, atheism, and meaning.
Hmm.
We want to show you that a universe without an eternal afterlife, without that divine safety net, isn't just some bleak, depressing void.
Right, it's not just emptiness.
Exactly. Rather, the sources suggest it's actually a canvas for this urgent, profound beauty.
So, let's start by unpacking the psychological engine behind all of this.
Hmm.
Because when reviewing the texts, there's this fascinating breakdown of why humanity invented the concept of an afterlife to begin with.
Uh-huh.
And the sources argue the core driver behind believing in God or a heavenly hereafter isn't actually the physical fear of dying.
Right, because people willingly face death all the time
Right.
for causes they believe in.
Exactly. It's not the dying part. It's the absolute terror of ending entirely, like just stopping.
Yeah, the existential dread of complete cessation it's a massive hurdle for the human mind. The texts delve into the evolutionary biology of this. Your brain is essentially this advanced prediction machine.
Okay, a prediction machine.
Yeah. Its entire biological purpose is to simulate future scenarios so you can survive them. It's constantly asking what happens next. But trying to process your own non-existence creates a paradox for that engine.
Because it can't compute nothing.
Right. The mind literally cannot simulate its own absence because the act of simulation requires a simulator. It's like asking a computer to calculate what it feels like to be unplugged. The hardware just short circuits.
Oh, wow, that makes so much sense.
Mm.
Which perfectly explains this terrifying mental image so many of us grew up with,
Yeah.
When we try to visualize what happens if there is no divine afterlife, it's so easy to imagine death as being trapped in a dark, empty waiting room for all eternity.
Yeah, the classic black void.
Right, just floating there in the pitch black, fully aware that we are dead. So, I have to ask, if we don't have a divine afterlife, are we just floating in a terrifying void?
Well, no. The scientific consensus detailed in our material completely dismantles that specific fear. To experience a void, or to perceive darkness, or to feel the anxiety of waiting, you fundamentally need a functioning biological system.
You need a brain to feel bored or scared.
Exactly. You need a cerebral cortex to process the passage of time. You need an intact visual cortex to register the absence of light. So when oxygen stops flowing and the brain's electrical activity ceases, awareness doesn't get transferred to a dark room.
It just stops.
Yes, awareness simply stops.
So there is no subjective experience of nothingness, because the subject experiencing it is gone.
Right. The analogy they often use is a burning candle. When a flame runs out of oxygen or wax, it quietly extinguishes. Nobody looks at an unlit candle and asks, "Oh, where did the flame go? Is it suffering in a dark void somewhere?"
That's a great point. You don't mourn the flame.
Because the flame is not an object, it's an event. It's a process of combustion. When the necessary conditions are removed, the event simply concludes. And human consciousness, neurologically speaking, is just an infinitely more complex version of that flame.
Okay, so the consciousness flame goes out. I grasp the neurology of that. But I think the listener's immediate instinct here is going to be about the physical reality, right? Because we know scientifically that matter cannot be created or destroyed. We don't just magically vanish into nothingness. So what actually happens to the material that makes us up?
Well, the physics and chemistry outlined in the sources describe this deeply interconnected reality. Your atoms do not vanish. They lose the temporary localized organization that you call yourself, and they just return to the broader ecosystem.
So we literally go back to the earth.
Exactly. The carbon in your cells, the nitrogen in your DNA, the iron in your blood, all of these elements were forged in the cores of dying stars billions of years ago. They were simply released back into the environment.
Yeah.
Your energy continues its journey through the universe, cycling through the earth, feeding into the roots of trees, evaporating into the atmosphere, and eventually becoming part of new living things.
It's essentially the ultimate cosmic recycling program. Like, the universe lent us these atoms for a few decades, and then it just reclaims them.
That's exactly it. The physical matter is effectively eternal. It's only the specific, highly organized, and, temporary configuration of that matter, the pattern that generates your current self-awareness that comes to an end.
Okay, let me push back on this a little because this is where the friction really starts for anyone raised in a faith tradition. You're talking about consciousness as just a temporary pattern of atoms.
Right.
But the natural counterargument, and really the core of thousands of years of theology, is the concept of the soul. The listener might be thinking, well, my atoms aren't me. My physical brain is just the hardware, but my soul is the ghost in the machine driving it. How do the sources address this dualistic idea?
They tackle it head-on by leaning heavily into modern neuropsychology. The texts challenge the concept of a soul existing independently of the physical body by looking at what happens when the physical brain is altered.
Like through an injury or something?
Yes. If an immortal, immaterial essence housed our true, unchangeable identity, then physical damage to the brain shouldn't really alter who we fundamentally are. I mean, the driver should still be exactly the same, even if the car's steering wheel is broken.
But medical science shows us the exact opposite.
The evidence is staggering.
Yeah.
Take Phineas Gage, the famous 19th century railway worker. He had a massive iron rod driven straight through his frontal lobe.
Oh, I've heard of him. He survived, right?
He did survive, but his entire moral compass and personality radically changed. He went from being this responsible, mild-mannered foreman to someone deeply impulsive and irreverent.
Wow.
Or look at neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. It doesn't just erase memories. As the physical tissue of the brain degrades, the person's core identity, their empathy, their temperament, it completely transforms.
They become someone their own families barely recognize.
Exactly.
That's a brutal reality to confront. Because if the soul is eternal and entirely separate from biology, why does a physical plaque build up in the brain change the soul's morality or personality?
Right, and the logical conclusion drawn by the scientific authors is that what human cultures have historically called a soul is really simply our poetic, pre-scientific terminology for the brain's complex executive functions. Your personality, your memories, your capacity for love, these are all generated by intricate webs of billions of firing neurons.
Meaning the soul is not a passenger riding inside the brain. The soul is what the brain is doing.
Precisely.
And when the brain stops doing it, the event is over. Just like a wave crashing on the shore. The wave isn't an object that disappears into a void. It was just a temporary behavior of the water.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Consciousness is an event, a magnificent temporary behavior of matter.
I have to admit, for anyone accustomed to the promise of an eternal sequel, letting go of an immortal soul feels deeply unsettling. It feels like an unbearable loss.
Yeah, it really does.
But there's a perspective in our sources that provides a fascinating cognitive tool for dealing with this specific anxiety. It's the pre-birth perspective, tracing back to philosophers like Epicurus.
Ah, yes, the symmetry argument. It is one of the most robust philosophical frameworks for confronting mortality.
The thought experiment asks you to think about the billions of years before you were born. Think about the year 1800, or the height of the Roman Empire, or the Jurassic period. When you consider those billions of years where you did not exist, were you scared? Was it a suffocating, agonizing void? Did you feel deprived of life?
And the answer is universally no. You experience absolutely no discomfort during the 13.8 billion years of the universe's history prior to your conception.
Because there was no you to be bothered by it.
Exactly. The philosophical point the texts are making here is that the timeline is symmetrical. The absence of existence after death is functionally identical to the absence of existence before birth. We have all already endured an eternity of non-existence, and it caused us zero suffering.
So you emerge from that peaceful nothingness for a brief, luminous flash of consciousness, and then you return to that exact same state.
Right. Nothingness cannot be experienced, and what cannot be experienced cannot inflict harm.
Okay, hold on. I want to challenge this on behalf of the listener. Let's say I accept the science. I accept that I have a temporary biological event, and the post-death state is just peaceful non-existence. This still triggers a massive existential crisis.
How so?
Because if there is no afterlife, no eternal soul, and no divine scorekeeper tallying up our deeds to hand out eternal rewards or punishments, then what is the point of doing anything?
Ah, the nihilism question.
Right. If I know a sandcastle is just going to wash away in the tide tomorrow, my instinct isn't to value it more. My instinct is to ask, why bother building it in the first place? Doesn't a lack of eternity drain life of all its inherent meaning?
That question sits at the very heart of existential philosophy. If meaning isn't handed down from the sky via divine decree, are we just spinning our wheels in the mud? The sources argue that we need a fundamental paradigm shift. We have been culturally conditioned to measure value by duration. We think longer is better and forever is best. But the atheistic and existentialist framework shifts the metric from the quantity of time to the quality of the experience. Meaning derives from the act of existing itself, not from how long that existence lasts.
So the value is in the doing, not the enduring.
Yes.
Let's make that concrete. The source material uses some fantastic analogies to illustrate why temporary things hold value. Think about sitting down to a phenomenal meal or listening to your favorite piece of music. When you listen to a symphony, you know it is going to end in 45 minutes.
Right.
But the fact that the music eventually stops doesn't ruin the experience of hearing it. You don't sit in the concert hall weeping because the cello solo isn't eternal.
No, you're immersed in the present reality of the melody. The temporary nature of the music is actually what gives it its structure and rhythm.
Or consider a spectacular sunset. The sky bursts into these incredible, vibrant pinks and oranges, and then inevitably it fades into the dark. The fading doesn't make the colors meaningless. In fact, if the sky looked like a sunset 24 hours a day, forever, it would become visual white noise. We wouldn't even bother to look up at it.
Which touches on the psychological problem with the concept of eternity. The texts highlight a profound paradox at the core of eternal life. If you apply the basic principles of economic scarcity to time, you realize something shocking.
What's that?
If we actually lived forever, if we possessed an infinite supply of tomorrows, the value of today would plummet to zero.
Oh, because scarcity is what creates value. If diamonds were as common as gravel, they'd be worthless. If time is infinite, time is worthless.
Exactly. In a state of true eternity, everything could be indefinitely postponed. There would be absolutely no urgency to mend a broken relationship, to learn a new skill, to alleviate someone's suffering, or to appreciate a beautiful afternoon. You could always do it in 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000 years. Transience and mortality, the very constraints we are so deeply terrified of, are the exact mechanisms that give our actions weight. They force us to act. They make this current moment indispensable because it is irreplaceable.
That drastically changes the perspective. A love that ends in 50 years isn't a failure compared to an eternal love. Its fragility is the exact source of its profound preciousness.
Absolutely.
But practically speaking, how does that translate to daily life? If we've established that a finite life is valuable because it ends, how do we construct a moral compass down here? If there are no divine rules written in the stars and no cosmic parent telling us what to do, where does purpose come from?
The consensus in secular philosophy is that meaning isn't something you find waiting for you. It is something you actively forge. We are conscious architects in a universe that otherwise lacks intent.
So we have to build it ourselves.
Yes, we construct meaning through our connections with others, through our curiosity about the cosmos, through art, and through the pursuit of understanding. It is a collaborative project among conscious beings.
But what about morality? The common religious critique is that without God, there is no reason to be good. Without the threat of hell or the promise of heaven, why not just be entirely selfish?
The sources address this by exploring how empathy functions in a secular framework. In many religious traditions, charity and kindness are often tied to a cosmic ledger. You act well to secure an eternal reward or please a creator.
Right, like cosmic karma.
But in a universe without an afterlife, empathy takes on a much more urgent and grounded reality. We acknowledge that physical and emotional pain are absolutely real, and importantly, they are final.
That makes me incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If there is no cosmic justice, no heaven to balance the scales. So, I mean, even if there's no heaven to balance the scales, it means the suffering we see on the news, the diseases, the injustices, that is the final word for those people. There is no paradise waiting to compensate them for their pain.
It is a heavy, terrifying burden.
Yeah.
If there is no eternal safety net where all the sick are magically healed and all the wronged are finally vindicated, then the suffering happening right now is absolute. But the secular argument is that this realization should not lead to despair. It should lead to radical, immediate empathy. We don't help others because a divine authority commanded us to. We help them because this specific, fleeting life is the only one they will ever get, and it is a shared tragedy if we allow it to be consumed by preventable misery.
We have to become our own saviors. It demands a terrifying amount of responsibility from us right here, right now.
Yeah,
We can't outsource justice to the afterlife.
exactly.
Which brings me to a staggering point detailed in the texts regarding our place in the cosmos. When you look at the sheer, unvarnished scale of the universe, the 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe, the endless oceans of freezing radioactive vacuum, it is unfathomably hostile and huge.
Oh, totally.
And from every scientific measurement we have, it is almost entirely devoid of consciousness. It is mostly dead rock, burning plasma, and dark matter.
We are having this complex conversation inside a universe that is, for all intents and purposes, entirely silent and unthinking. Consciousness is a biological anomaly.
Knowing how incredibly rare that is, knowing that our ability to think and feel is just this tiny, fragile spark in the middle of a massive, dark machine, I mean, it could easily make someone feel entirely insignificant.
It could. Yet the existential perspective flips that insignificance on its head. The sheer improbability of your consciousness is the source of its ultimate value.
How so?
Well, you are made of the universe's own matter. Therefore, you are literally the universe experiencing itself. For a few brief decades, a collection of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen woke up, looked around the cosmos, and developed the capacity to feel love, to ask questions, and to experience wonder.
We are the universe growing eyes to look at its own beauty. The rarity doesn't make us small. It makes us the most remarkable phenomenon in existence.
The universe does not care about you, which means the caring is entirely up to us. We are the only source of warmth in the cold.
Let's bring all these threads together because the ultimate synthesis we're pulling from these sources reveals a brilliant, counterintuitive paradox. The historical promise of a guaranteed heaven, an eternal afterlife where every problem is solved and everything is perfectly fine forever, might actually be diminishing the value of the life we are living today.
It fundamentally devalues the present. If every earthly injustice is guaranteed to be magically fixed in eternity and every tear is wiped away in a limitless sequel, then our struggles down here lose their gravity.
Our fights for justice, our attempts to cure diseases, our fleeting moments of intense joy, they all get reduced to a brief, meaningless preamble before the real eternal life begins. It turns this profound, beautiful existence into nothing more than a crowded waiting room.
That's a powerful way to put it.
But if we accept the science we've discussed today, if we accept that the flame will eventually extinguish and there is no dark void waiting for us, only the peaceful symmetry of the time before we were born, then the paradigm shifts entirely. It is our absolute mortality, the ticking clock of our biology, that makes our current reality indispensable.
Based on the deep dive into these materials, I want to leave you with a philosophical challenge to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you knew with absolute certainty that this brief flash of consciousness was the only life you would ever get, with no cosmic safety net, no divine scorekeeper, and no eternal sequel waiting in the wings, how would that profoundly change the way you treat the stranger you pass on the street tomorrow?
That is the genuine challenge of this perspective. Because if there is no eternal waiting room, then the fragile flame we are tending to right now is the only light there is. We have no choice but to make it count. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration, for keeping an open mind, and for thinking deeply with us. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.